Injuries everywhere, but who do you start instead? Today, we'll go through the best streamers and stashes for week 3 of the fantasy season on the Fantasy First Down. The injuries are coming early this year, so it's time to talk streamers and stashes for week 3. Who can you pick up and start this week, and who should you be stashing for the bye weeks that are coming very soon? If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also check us out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O, and our website is ffdfantasyfootball.com. Plus, my articles, including my streamers and stashes article, are out at football.rasball.com. But today we're talking streams and stashes for week 3, and we're starting things off with the quarterbacks. And it seems wacky to have Joe Burrow in a streamers list, but he's been totally unstartable the last 2 weeks. He hasn't had T. Higgins. He's been facing difficult oppositions. This week, he gets the Washington Commanders, and that is one juicy matchup. So I am starting Burrow this week. In every league I have him. I'm even starting him over Patty Mahomes because realistically, I think he's going to have a fantastic week. Assuming that T. Higgins is back. If Higgins isn't back, I'll drop him a little bit, but he's still a fantastic streaming option. Brock Purdy is a guy that's been dropped in a lot of leagues that I've seen. When waivers came through, I was shocked how many times Purdy appeared. He takes on the Rams, who concede top 5 in fantasy points against quarterbacks, not only this season, but last season as well. So Purdy should have a bounce back game. I think a lot of people are avoiding him because he doesn't have Deebo Samuel, but he still doesn't have Christian McCaffrey, of course, as well, but he does have George Kittle. He's got Brandon Ayuk. I still think he's going to do enough to be a viable streaming option. If you don't like that because of the lack of Deebo, well, go get Derek Carr instead. He gets a great matchup against the Eagles. A lot of people are picking him up because he's been good in tougher matchups. This is a matchup that should suit him nicely. Admittedly, we saw last week that the Falcons actually managed to run on the Eagles a lot, which is a thing not a lot of teams have been able to do lately. But I do think that Carr is still going to get his this week as well. We've seen that the Eagles are definitely susceptible through the air. Now, also a stash. I don't really love stashing quarterbacks realistically, unless you're really struggling at quarterback. There's no particularly good reason to have two. There's always going to be some available. But I'm stashing Kirk Cousins because this is a very difficult matchup against the Chiefs. But he'll have better matchups coming up. I do think he's going to have a good season. We saw how good he could be against the Eagles. He really looked effective when the game was on the line. Suddenly he needed to throw the ball. He just needs to get more into more situations like that. And I think there are some more coming. So he's going to be a viable starter at times this season. Now, running back streamers, and there's a lot of names on this list, and the first one on the list is Carson Steel. He's taking over as the lead back for the Chiefs. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with Kareem Hunt, but it's hard to see him turning up and a couple of days later suddenly becoming the starter for the Chiefs. Clyde Edwards-Helaire obviously isn't back either. So you've got Carson Steel. You picked him up off waivers. It's viable to start him this week against the Falcons. It's not the greatest matchup, but they're also hard to pass on. So I can imagine him getting some goal line carries. I think he has touchdown upside. I think he's a solid option. Tony Pollard gets a great matchup against the Packers, who have been struggling. I feel like this could be a little bit of a run fest with Josh Jacobs having such a big game last week. I feel like the same could happen. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Titans do as well. And this is a very low scoring game. Tyjae Spears is still suffering from some injury issues. I believe he has checking my notes, ankle injury and is expected to be limited in week 3. So Pollard is going to be a solid option against the Packers. I'm happy to start him. I wouldn't usually be most weeks, but especially in half PPR, I think he's going to be on the cusp of being a top 24 option. Zier White gets a fantastic matchup against the Panthers. And as I'll be talking about in the Rasball show tomorrow night, if you're in the US, or maybe tonight, if you're in the US, Zier White is one of my favorite starts for this week. He is excellent in games where the Raiders are leading. He is significantly more effective because they need to be ahead for him to run the ball, and they're going to be leading the whole time against the Panthers, who, despite having Andy Dalton in there, are still likely to struggle on both sides of the ball. So White is a great start for me, especially in non-PPR and half PPR, but even in PPR, he's still an option for me. And Zach Charbonnet, I mean, look, he's a guy I wanted to put in this list last week, but I missed my window because it only became clear that Kenneth Walker was actually going to miss the game quite late on in the week relative to when I release these and record these. So Charbonnet, he goes in this week instead. The Dolphins should be a good matchup now that they don't have Tua Tagovailoa. So I do think the Seahawks probably going to be ahead. We've seen that Charbonnet played pretty much every down. I think he had only a couple of downs off. They don't really love Kenny McIntosh. They're not going to use George Helani, so it is going to be Charbonnet. I'm assuming that Walker's out, which I believe he will be. Charbonnet suddenly becomes an excellent streaming option. In fact, realistically, I like these two streamers more than the other two that I mentioned earlier. Stashes, I just mentioned Kareem Hunt. I do think that he's going to have a role that grows over the season. I'm nervous about Clyde Edward-Helaire turning up, but if you're somebody that just needs like a mid-range running back 3 kind of guy, you've been getting by with guys like Rico Dowdle and Jalen Warren and people like that, and you just need someone with a little bit more upside. I feel like Hunt has a bit more upside. I'm not convinced he's going to be good for a couple of weeks, and I'm not even sure that he's going to be good after that, but he at least has the potential to be a clear lead guy. There's plenty of other guys, and of course in the Streamers and Stashes article, I give you the whole list. Bucky Irving is my favorite because it is possible he will take over on merit. Plus, Rashad White is dealing with a minor injury, though I expect him to play. I believe it's a groin injury for White. Let me check my list. Yes, it's a groin injury, but I do expect him to play. Irving, however, has been getting plenty of touches, and it is possible he takes over, though I don't think he does. I think you're really relying on a White injury before you're really going to be able to start him. I would have had Tank Bigsby in here as well. I think he's a good option too. He is battling a bit of an injury himself, but he should be able to play. I do think he's starting to take some touches away from Etienne, but I think his main value is in the fact that if Etienne gets injured, which is very possible, all of a sudden he's the clear starter in an offense that likes to run the ball a lot. But I've moved Braylon Allen a little bit ahead of him, firstly because I have a feeling that we will see a little bit of Dearness Johnson even if Bigsby becomes the clear starter, and that's going to hurt a little bit. Plus, Braylon Allen was fantastic, scored 2 touchdowns. I've been talking all preseason how good he was. He's still fantastic. He's possibly my favorite actual true handcuff. If you've got a handcuff that you're just definitely not going to play at any point in time, and you're only going to use them because your starters are so fantastic, you really just need guys with the upside. I do think Braylon Allen has legit top 5 upside. If Breece Hall goes down, I can imagine Allen suddenly being a total league winner and someone that you're definitely going to want on your roster. So just get him there early. That's how we do things in fantasy football. That is how you win games later in the season. I pressed the wrong button. There we go. Wide receiver streamers, and gosh, a lot of injuries for the Rams. Obviously, Cooper Kupp joins Puka Nacua on the sidelines. That means it's Demarcus Robinson season. He was the clear number 1 option. I do think we'll see a little bit of Tyler Johnson. We'll see some Jordan Whittington. We saw Tutu Atwell get a lot of targets despite literally being on the field for 10 snaps. He's had 16 snaps all season, and people are going and picking him up, which is a bit crazy. Demarcus Robinson is the guy here. The 49ers have been very susceptible to wide receivers over the last season and a bit, so I would be picking up Robinson. I wouldn't confidently start him, but I'd start him if I needed a wide receiver streamer. It's better than any of these other options. Andre Josevas gets a really good matchup against Washington. If you've got him, this is the week to start him because his touchdown upside is high. He is very boom bust because they mainly use him in the red zone. He's out there most of the rest of the time, but they only really mainly use him then. T. Higgins coming back will really hurt Josevas, but it's still a fantastic matchup. I do expect them to score plenty of points, and I feel like he's a real touchdown possibility. Juwan Jennings obviously becomes the wide receiver too with Deebo Samuel out. A lot of people getting very excited about this. It is a good matchup against the Rams. They are susceptible to wide receivers. Well, they were last season anyway. I'm not sure that they will be this season, but they were last season. I do think he's got a chance of having a good game, but very risky option, very low floor. So for that reason, there's better options for me. But he is someone you can start if you're desperate. Stash options, and these are guys I just think you should pick up and store on your bench for now. I wouldn't want to start them. Deontay Johnson against the Raiders. I don't want to start anyone from the Panthers yet until I can see them actually be functional, but we'll see how they go with Andy Dalton. Obviously, Bryce Young has been benched, if you hadn't heard that. Andy Dalton comes in, maybe a more functional offense. We've seen him manage to make things happen in the past. Deontay Johnson should be the number 1 guy. He played all but 3 snaps last week after being used a little bit sparingly in week 1. I do expect that he has a starting role. What that looks like, I don't exactly know. And for that reason, I'm kind of, I don't know, using a little bit of caution on Johnson, but I do think he's a solid player. He's someone that I'm happy to use. Happy to have on my bench, I should say, and I'll use him once I've actually seen him get it done. Elijah Moore's another guy that I'm interested in. I mean, this isn't a bad matchup, but I actually need to see him do it consistently. Jerry Jeudy started to take over a lot more of the slot snaps. They split them with Moore this week and Cooper also gets involved after Moore was the main slot guy in week 1. Plus, Jeudy had more snaps than Moore this week. It was Moore getting more snaps in week 1, so I'm saying Moore a lot. I feel like I want to have Elijah Moore on my bench just to see what happens because I do feel like there's some clear upside there. And DeAndre Hopkins, he is a great stash if he's available. He won't be available in most leagues, but there are leagues where I've seen him be dropped, especially shallower leagues. Realistically, he should be the number 1 option in this offense, but he's only played 47 snaps through the first 2 weeks. It was like 17 in week 1 and 30 in week 2. He will slowly get ramped up. People will start dropping him because of his lack of production. He's someone you can pick up and have a lot of upside there. So I do like Nook as well. Tight ends. Hunter Henry was on this list in week 1 as a stash. I had a feeling this might be coming. The idea that he is the number 1 option in this offense. We saw him pop off in week 2. Hopefully you stashed him like I suggested and you used him in week 2. But if not, use him in week 3. Takes on the Jets. The Jets have some excellent outside cornerbacks. They will shut down wide receivers, especially when they're mediocre wide receivers like the rookie Jalen Polk, who's fine, but he's a rookie. And whoever the other Patriots wide receiver on the outside is, KJ Osborne. I believe a little bit of Tyquan Thornton. Don't want any of those guys, and they're going to be shut down easily enough. We might see a little bit more Pop Douglas than we do usually, but Hunter Henry could have another big game here, along with a solid running game from Stevenson. The Jets are particularly susceptible on the ground, but they also do give away a lot of points against tight ends. They did the most points against tight ends a couple of seasons ago. At the moment, they're kind of like mid-range towards the high side when it comes to points against to tight ends. And Brendan Strange, assuming Evan Ingram is out, which I believe he is, he's taken the passing down snaps, essentially. If you really want a deeper streaming option, he's someone that you could easily pick up. He is essentially taking that Evan Ingram role. Still losing a few more snaps than Ingram does to Luke Farrell, who's the blocking tight end, but I still think Strange is a viable option. Having said that, I whiffed a little bit on Jordan Akins last week. He ultimately didn't get used the way I hoped he would. He wasn't even out there on all the passing downs, on all the 11 personnel. They used some Blake Whiteheart for some unknown reason. So it is possible that we'll see that happen with Strange, but we've at least seen Strange play a game without Ingram. I feel like this could come back and be a positive thing, kind of like we saw with Luke Schoonmaker last week for the Cowboys. Unfortunately, can't use him because Ferguson seems like he'll be back. If Ferguson's not back, though, Schoonmaker is a great option. Stashes, Greg Dulcich is starting to play a lot more snaps now. He's got a more clearly defined role, but Bo Nix is passing the ball a reasonable amount. He's going mostly to his wide receivers, but I do feel like that Dulcich could emerge as the clear starting tight end in most 11 personnel packages. That's going to be a good thing for him. He was being used as just the passing down guy early last season. It looked like that might continue this season, but Adam Troutman's who's more the blocking guy, has been dialed back a little bit. So I do feel like Dulcich could emerge as a guy that you can use. And Zach Ertz, a lot of people like starting this week. Wouldn't really want to start him this week against Cincy. It is possible he becomes the number 2 receiving option in this offense. Terry McLaurin is the nominal number 1, but they're hardly using him. They're hardly passing the ball at all, realistically. It's nearly Austin Eckler that's the number 1 option. I'd be avoiding all pass catches realistically for Washington, but tight end is so barren at the moment, which is a crazy thing to say after how positive it looked going into the season. Ertz is someone who's at least an option. I don't feel particularly good about him. I don't want to start him yet. Kickers, talked about these in my waiver wire video. Daniel Carlson against Carolina. You just start any running backs, kickers, and DSTs against Carolina. Daniel Carlson should have another good week. He was a top 3 kicker last week as well, so I expect him to have another good week. Harrison Butker is available in a surprising amount of my leagues. I was shocked. I don't quite understand why. He's a very good kicker. It's maybe because of his controversial opinions, which I'm not going to get into. Against Atlanta concedes a lot of points to kickers, so Butker is a top-end option. Really like him this week if he's available, and he might be because there are leagues where people aren't using him. And finally, DSTs. I mean, I've talked about Raiders against Carolina. Don't need to talk about that again. Tennessee has really struggled. They've conceded the most points against DSTs this season. Will Levis is what I thought Will Levis was. Not particularly good at football. I mean, great relative to me, but at an NFL standard, very much low end. Bryce Young being out really puts pressure on him as arguably being the worst non-backup quarterback being started at the moment. So I do expect that we see Tennessee have to pass the ball, even though it's possible it's still Malik Willis for the Packers. Not sure what's happening with Jordan Love. If Jordan Love's back, this becomes a fantastic play because all of a sudden the Titans are going to have to chase. If not, it might be a little bit of a ground and pound fest. If you're in a league that gives you a lot of points for sacks and interceptions and things like that, you want the Titans to be chasing the game. If most of your points come from restricted yardage, restricted points, like not allowing a lot of points or yardage on the ground or in general, then you probably want the Packers DST with Malik Willis starting for the Packers, which is a bit weird. It's just that that's more likely to lower the game score in general. So regardless, it should be a solid option, but there are other options available to you. If you don't like these, Buccaneers, for example, is a solid option I've seen available in some leagues. So that is the streamers and stashes for week 3. I hope you're enjoying the fantasy season so far and that injuries haven't kicked your butt too much. It would be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. Our Instagram is @thefantasyfirstdown. Fire me any questions there, or you can just stick them in the comments below. My Twitter is @fantasyfirstdown with no O. The website is ffdfantasyfootball.com. That's where my rankings will be when they come out. And finally, we have football.rasball.com for all of my articles. I look forward to seeing you guys in a couple of days' time when I'll be talking through my start and sits for week 3 of the season.